today on the podcast, I'm actually bringing on one of my patients who came to me at such a time of depletion. She'd been caring for her husband for many years who had brain cancer and raising children pretty much solo with no family or friend support. She's a mum of 4 and she has lost her husband to brain cancer. She's only 35, and which is my age. It just breaks my heart. Hayley is such a beautiful, kind soul, is such a good mother and such a fighter for her rights, but unfortunately the battle ends. She lost her husband. So I've invited Hayley on to share her story because she has a lot of people that ask lots of questions, and it's just a great place to share it. But by all means, if you feel touched by Hayley's story, Hayley's now living on the Sunshine Coast, mum of 4, please reach out to her, whether it's to catch up with your children and offer some, support in any way. I'm sure she would appreciate it. I'm going to leave her handle on my show notes, and she's on Instagram at Haddis Amore. She is a beautiful artist. She was doing lots of birth photography and beautiful photography before obviously her husband passing. Anyway, I don't want to talk for too long in this introduction because the podcast is long, and we're going to dive straight into it. Okay, welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today I am blessed to have Hayley Wernicke sharing the story of a love and death with Diego, her husband. And this is actually the second time we've had to record this because something happened the first time. We've got the part 2, but anyway, so this is the second time Hayley's had to relive and share all this.
Yes.
We've had some technical issues, but hopefully this time it's going to work, and you only have to do this once. So thank you for showing up and sharing the story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for, bringing it alive and giving me a chance to, get it out as well, because otherwise it's all kind of in. It's just this is the second time round. But
yeah. Well, so many people, I think, have watched the stories that you've shared along the way and feel really connected to you and Diego. So where should we start? Let's start from the very beginning. So what were the things that made you, question what was going on with Diego's health?
Okay, yeah. So I think Diego was working full-time as a tattooist, and I feel like we just started to notice little things. Like if I look back, this is looking back, pre-diagnosis, he would just some mental health kind of stuff. He was feeling quite flat. He was always complaining of a headache, but obviously being that tattoo artist as well, we just put it down to the fact of, his eyes giving him a headache and all the things, but it was just continual. So he did go and see a few GPs along the way, just about feeling really flat, having no energy, and just these crazy headaches that he couldn't explain as to where they're coming from. But it was, yes, it could be just from your eyes because he was wearing glasses, just having, drawing and all of those things for that many hours. He also got told, here, try some antidepressants and some, so he did actually go down that route a little bit to give it a go, and we were really hesitant, but he was desperate, I guess, for help in the way he was feeling, and the headaches and all of the things. And, doctors would be like, try some yoga, try some, just all these things, just brushing him off, basically. Yeah. Not really taking these headaches seriously. It was getting quite concerning, the headaches that he was having too. And I remember at one point he even said, I feel like I need to see a neurologist, but how do I get there? And he'd even brought it up to doctors before, but they kind of just made him, he always come back from his doctor's appointments feeling like he was too much or asking for too much or being silly or being over the top, he was never, and you could see that it would get him down because I guess he felt like no one was listening to him. But I just still remember that time when he said, he asked to see a neurologist and they were like, no, try this and try that, and if you come back, and he was just kind of off it and just sick and tired of it. And he did try some of the antidepressants to see if that helped, but that was giving him brain zaps and all these weird symptoms, and it wasn't helping his situation one bit. So I guess that's kind of where it started to a degree. But then comes, I guess, the big seizure, which is kind of what got the whole journey rolling, I guess. So I was working as a birth photographer, and I was out that night. One night he had the kids, so we had the 3 kids at that time, and Inca was only just under 1. So I was out at a birth that night. I'd come home that morning, and he was kind of taking our eldest at the time to kindy, and he had the other 2 in the car. And I was on my way home. I had spoken to him to let him know, and he's getting the kids in the car. Anyways, I'm driving home unaware of what I'm about to land into, and I pull in our driveway and I see the neighbours out, and I see the girls just screaming hysterically, and I see what looked like Diego on the floor. Anyways, the neighbours had ran over to me and in the car, so I'd literally stopped midway down the driveway, and they just said, look, we think Diego is overdosing. And I just I don't know, my brain just got in this protective mode, because I was like, what do you mean? He doesn't even drink alcohol. So I was like, no, this couldn't be it. As if, I was actually quite angry. I kind of got out of the car, left the doors open, ran to him, and he was having a seizure. And at that point, I guess I'd never really seen a seizure up close before, but it was quite horrific. And at this point, it had been going, I'm guessing maybe up to 5 minutes. He was just rolling around on the floor. There was mosquitoes all over him. The girls were screaming. The neighbours were trying to take the kids away, because it was quite horrific to watch, the frothing at the mouth. And it was a lot for me. So I can imagine the girls at this point would have been maybe 5, 4 and 1, or just under 1. So he went down with Inca in his hands as well. So the car was still running as well. So, I was just my brain was just what is going on? I'm trying to catch my thoughts. They're saying he's overdosing. I don't even know what is going on. Why is he having a seizure? And he had a blood coming from his head. So I just automatically thought, hold on, he's fallen, tripped, knocked his head, and that's brought on a seizure. That's just, my brain was just going there. Not that he'd had a seizure first, And so I'm turning the car engine off. The neighbours have kind of calming down the kids, and I'm trying to wake Diego up. And at this point, Diego's trying to stand up at the same time as having he's coming to, I guess, but completely not there. So it was trying to get him to stay down on the grass so that he wasn't going to hurt himself anymore. And at this time, they were already on the phone to the ambulance. So the ambulance are hearing all of this. And I think at this point, they're all thinking he's overdosing. And I'm like, no. But there was this little tiny part of me that was hold on a minute, has my whole life been a lie? Surely not. There is that little bit of, well, I can't say 100%, because I really don't know. If he had been, it would have been a complete lie to our whole family. But, my gut was no, something, what's happened. And I just thought he tripped, has he tripped and hit his head, knocked his head, But anyways, the ambulance came not too long after that. And, he'd just kind of come to a bit then, but really groggy and, could barely stand, and was kind of saying some irrational things, not making sense. And I just said, at this point too, in the back of my head, I knew that he was having these headaches. So I was just can you please promise me that you're going to check him out? This is not normal. Because, they were I just said, he's not overdosing because he doesn't do anything. Something's happened. We don't know what's come first, blah, blah, blah. And they just assured me that, no, they'd take him in, and that they won't just release him, and that they will be doing, because he's had this head injury, they will be doing some studies, and I'll have time to get the kids looked after and get myself in to check on him. And they took him, and I had someone watch the kids. I took the kids to my mum's, actually, and she was able to watch them, and I met Diego in the hospital. So, I landed in emergency, and as I got there, they were pretty much discharging him. And Diego just looked in shock. He was a lot more there, a lot more back to he wasn't himself, but he was definitely there. And I was a bit more protective at this point, because I was like, what do you mean they're letting you go? What's happened? What was that? And the doctor, they were so packed at this point, and this was 2019, so this was pre everything that's gone in the world. So it was, but they were still so busy, and you could tell that they were just needing beds. And they just kind of said to me, I said, what happened? Do you think he's fallen and then knocked his head? What's come first? He was definitely having a seizure. And he just said, no, we can't say that he's had a seizure, because there was no adult witnesses that he had a seizure. And I said, well, I'd got there at the tail end of it, and I witnessed the jerking and the frothing at the mouth and all of that. And he's like, no, there's no adult witnesses. I said, my kids seen it, and they described what they'd seen. They're like, no, we can't. And I said, okay, so have you done any testing, a brain scan, anything? And they just said, no, we just think that he's dehydrated. So they ran some bloods. They all came back fine. And they just said, go home, have some water. He's probably just fainted. My gut was no, because I had, all these thoughts of his headaches and everything at this point. I was just something, and just the fact that he said he wanted to see a neurologist was in the back of my head too. And I was just no, something's not right. I didn't allow him to drive. Like, I was just like, no, he's not driving to work the next day. We went home anyways because there was nothing we could do. And I just said, I'm going to book him into my GP, who's just a lovely GP that I've kind of had through, like, my home births and everything. She's just a beautiful GP. I was like, no, I'm going to take him there and, let her know what had happened and see if, if they can investigate a little bit further. They were still adamant it wasn't a seizure. So the next morning he woke up and he was really stiff and sore. And I was just like, exactly, he's had a seizure. Like, that's why he's really sore. Like, all of his muscles were sore from all of the, tension and stuff from the seizure. So I was like, just more confirming, And at this point, being a male too, he was like, I'm going to go to work. I've got clients. I was like, maybe you can go to work a little bit here and there, but I'm driving you too. So there was like a few days before I could get in with my GP. So like, he went to work, but I would drive him and I would pick him up, and he just wasn't feeling great. So I think he ended up like cancelling a lot of his clients. Like, there wasn't much work in that period of time. So took him to our GP, and she was kind of mortified that they hadn't done any scans. So she's just like, look, let's just order, because she knew his history. She'd known that he'd complained of headaches, and they'd done the blood test, and they'd done like tried the pharmaceuticals and stuff to try and help, that kind of thing, and nothing works. So at this point she's kind of clicking on to like, something's not right here. And she automatically straight away ordered a CT scan. She's like, let's just start with this and see where we go. So I think it was like the following day we could get in for the CT. So I took him to the CT scan, and that night actually she calls me and she just said, get Diego. And I did. She's like, are you sitting? Can you please sit down? This was quite late at night. So this would have been, because, mind you, we still had the kids amongst this. We're doing like drop-offs and had the 3 little ones at home. And it would have been like, I don't know, 5, 6. It was dark. And she's just like, are you sitting down? And by that point, my gut just went. And I just remember looking at Diego, and she's just like, you actually have a brain tumor in your brain, and it's the size of like a tennis ball. And we need you to get to hospital. I've pre-organised everything because of the history that we just had and the fact that they just kind of let him go. She's like, I've ran through and told them that, that they're expecting you basically. So you shouldn't have any dramas, but pack a hospital bag, get in there as soon as you can. And we just kind of got off the phone to her. She's like, I'm sorry, and are you okay? And, she was amazing. She called through and everything. But then we got off the phone. I just remember looking at Diego, and I don't even think many words were said, except it was almost like we could look at each other and like our hearts broke in that moment. And also like, I knew it. Like, oh my God, this is it. You were right. Like, I can't believe this is happening right now, but I kind of can because of the situation. But yeah, so I think that was really hard, but at the same time I think we were trying to be strong. So we were just like overwhelmed. Like, I think adrenaline was running through my body, and I don't know how he was feeling, and I was always really cautious of like, how would that be receiving that news? But also like, I knew it, like, he's like, I was right. So we didn't really know what to think, how bad it was. All of the things were running through our head, but the main thing was like calling my mum, because that's all we really had around to try and get the 3 kids looked after, so that I could take him into the hospital. So we kind of got that organised as soon as we could, packed a bag, and off to the hospital we went at night. But they were great. They kind of knew we were coming, so we went straight to ward. But then, you kind of sit in the ward, and you kind of just been told over the phone you have a brain tumour, but you kind of, no one's giving you any information. So it was very scary, and like in our head we're like, well, this is huge, but where is everybody? Like, what's going on? And you'd get like register come in and be like, do you understand why you're here? We found this. And like they talk in their terms, and you kind of, these names have really weird names, and I guess nothing had been biopsied at this point and proper MRI at this point, so they're kind of like, it's looking like XYZ. And so it's just like all of this, it could be, should be, we don't really know, but this is what we're thinking, but we're going to need to do a biopsy. And at this point, I think from the CT scan, no, this would have been, from the MRI first. So it was like, we need to get you in for an MRI. So I think that night they MRI'd and then came back and just said, we're going to have to biopsy. You've got kind of what looks like almost 2 different tumours, like 2 different grades of tumours with, like, that's showing from the MRI. And they were just concerned that they couldn't get to the back to biopsy that one that looks, that's kind of, the contrast is a lot stronger. So that's really the one they need to get, but they couldn't really get there safely. So they were kind of toing and froing for a couple of days. It was kind of like, you're going in on this day to have a biopsy? No, you're not. This is safe. No, we're actually just going to go straight in and debulk, rather than go in and biopsy and then go in again and debulk. We're just going to go in and debulk and biopsy at the same time. So this is just all kind of getting thrown around. No one sits you down and says, this is what's happening. Like, there's no comfort, and you just kind of feel like you're winging it, I guess. But it's all so new and confronting at this stage. It's just really overwhelming. And, then we also had the girls at home as well. So it's like, juggling the kids. Inca was still breastfeeding. So she would have just been just on 12 months. And quite confronting at that stage. But so it was just like a waiting game at that point, and just a whole lot of unknown. I think people assume, and then everyone else also is like, what's going on? What's happening? And it's like, well, I don't actually have answers for you, because they're not giving me answers. No one's sitting you down and treating you like a human, but you kind of don't really know what to expect. And long story short, it was about a week between that and him being in hospital waiting to have, they finally said they were just going to start off with debulking and biopsying at the same time, but they don't think that they can get what looks like the worst out. And in
basically brain surgery.
Yes, yeah. And at that point, even then, I knew that was big, because we all kind of know that's big, right? You're just kind of like, well, they're going to operate on his brain. Is he going to live? Is he going to make it? What's the risks? And no one sits you down and tells you anything. Like, you kind of get a register come in and go, here's a piece of paper. This is what can go wrong. And nearly everything these days says, there's a chance of death. There's a chance of this. But I remember going, what is a craniotomy? It's craniotomy?
Craniotomy, yeah.
Like, what is that? They talk to you in all these like fancy words, but I'm like, can someone sit down and tell me, how long is surgery? Roughly, like, what is the downside to this? Like, what's going to be, the recovery for this? All of the questions you kind of have in your head, you don't get answered. It's just kind of like, sign here. This is what can happen. Obviously, there's death. Obviously, there's bleeds. This is what we're aiming for. Sign here. And if you want to ask questions, you just got to register that's like, I'll be back in a minute, or I'll try and get the doctor to come in, or I'll try and get the surgeon. Like, it's just a roundabout, and I just remember that, just feeling really overwhelmed, but also feeling like I don't want to be a pain, asking like, you just feel so awkward. And Diego's definitely not one that was very confronting or anything either. He kind of just went with the flow too. So it was an awkward stage. But at the same time, we were like, well, it kind of makes sense that they have to get this thing out. Like, what's your other option? Yeah. So let's just do this. And in between that time, he I think they were giving him fluids or something in his arm, and he ended up getting a reaction to that. And it kind of, it got really, really infected, and, started to get really hot and temperatures. And then they thought that he'd got an infection of some sort in between. So they were really concerned. I know, like, infectious diseases came in, but it turned out he had a reaction to some drug that had put in his arm. I think it was like they were starting him on like anti-seizure meds. Okay, yeah. And like, looking back now, I'm well aware now of the side effects of anti-seizure meds, but back then I had no idea. But he was reacting to something, and that was just another thing that they weren't listening to. But that caused him a lot of pain, and just a lot of drama in between this surgery wait. But that got sorted, and he went in for surgery. Still the same thing on the day of his surgery to come around. Even the night before his surgery, we still hadn't been sat down, because I kept thinking someone's going to come in and chat to me. Someone's going to come in and sit us down, and at this time, like, I'm coming in, chilling with him, getting him healthy food, bringing the kids in to visit, in all this week wait. But no, like, each day no one was coming. It was just like no one came around, and the nurses were quite short and quite rude at this point. And I just remember being really quite petrified and wanting to know, is surgery happening tomorrow? Like, because it was still kind of like, maybe should be, like, there was never a definite. And, Thursday night rolls around, and it's like, I don't know, I think it was like 10 o'clock, and I'm just still thinking someone's going to come and talk to me. Like, he's having surgery tomorrow at this stage. And, I wanted to know, when can I come see him before, or can I see him after? What's going to happen? Like, who's going to call me? Like, what is the procedure like? This is brain surgery. And the kids as well, and no one would say anything to me. And so then it was time for me to head, and I went out to the nurses and I just said, is he having surgery tomorrow? And they're like, oh, well, there was very, oh, we think so, he should be. And I'm like, do you have a rough time? Do you know roughly how long this surgery is going to take? Is someone going to call me? Oh, well, he should be first up in the morning, really early. It's like 6 o'clock, they get them prepped and out. He should be one of the first ones up. Yeah, someone will call you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so short with me that I was just like, I think I just cried on the spot. Like, I was just like, my nervous system at this point was just like, I don't even know what's happening tomorrow. Like, I don't know what this entails. I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know, you know, like, are they going to call me at this point? I just remember being really upset. And they said, I said, can I come in the morning and see him? And they were like, yeah, just come around 6. You know, someone will let you in. Like, it was just very rude. Like, I was being annoying. And I left, and I was coming back the next morning. So I had a friend come with me, and someone said at this point, you know, you can evoke like a Ryan's rule or something to try and get them to answer your questions, because he's going in for brain surgery. And we did try that morning to have like some form of conversation, but yeah, nothing really happened. They just kind of took him, got him dressed, and just said, you know, we will call you. And they took my number as a second, like, you know, took it again to make sure they had the right number, and that was it. They took him. And I just remember, you know, being horrified, because it was like the first one. And, you know, now I look back, I'm like, I knew nothing, but, you know, like
Yeah.
it was huge. So yeah, the wait was quite daunting. And yeah, and then they called me and said that he was out. No, actually they didn't. I remember I was calling, and yeah, he still wasn't out. And then I think I left a message and someone did call me, but it was like a fair while after he had come out, but he was still in ICU. So there was like a little bit of, you know, miscommunication there, but I just kind of obviously headed up straight away and went into ICU. And at that point I didn't know what I was going to walk into. But I just hoped that he would know who I was and that he would be normal. And because they didn't really say what could go wrong. I think the only thing they said is like, you know, paralyzed down one side. You just kind of like almost Googling stuff yourself, because you just kind of like, what can happen? And yeah, my biggest fear was just like, please remember who I am. And he was really groggy, but he kind of reached out, you know, and held my hand. So that was like a really good moment to know that he was still there, but, you know, cords and head bandages, and it was quite horrific. But I just kind of sat there with him, and he was in ICU, I think, for 2 days, and then back on the ward. And I was actually shocked at how quickly they actually, like, for me, I was like, whoa, brain surgery. But yeah, it was quite quick, I guess, recovery than I was expecting at that time. They get them up and, you know, try to make sure they can walk and use the toilet quite quickly after something like that. So yeah, that was our experience with the first one. And then we just had to wait, you know, like no one come in and told me how it went, you know, what goes on from here. Even now we're still not even knowing, because at this point it was like, you know, you have all different grades.
Yeah.
So how cancerous is this? This is benign. Like,
yeah.
I'm just like, you have so many thoughts running through your head, like, you know, and everyone's also wanting answers. Like, he has family in Argentina, and then I didn't have that much family here, but I had my mom, and everyone's like, you know, what's happening? And I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. I'm just winging this. And yeah, so now you've got about a 2-week wait for biopsies to come back and tell you exactly what is going on in there. But one of the registers come out and just said that, you know, they debulked. They got as much as they could. They couldn't get everything because it's not safe, which is kind of like, you hear that from everybody now when it comes to brain surgery. But they biopsied, but they also couldn't get to the back to biopsy that either because it wasn't safe. So yeah, it was a 2-week wait. So I think we were in hospital only for about 4 days. And no one really come around, and you're just still a waiting game, even though he's just had brain surgery. It's kind of quite crazy. And, you know, we didn't get like a social worker or, you know, like nothing like that. And I didn't really know what you're like entitled to or what you should have at this point. But, you know, your whole world's just been blown up. You've got brain tumor. We don't know if it's cancerous. He's not working. Your whole life just kind of gets flipped in that moment of like, what now? What do we do? But let's just take it slow. And we were also in the middle of a move when this happened. So we were moving house on the day of his surgery. This was all pre-planned to his seizure. So I had a whole bunch of girlfriends moving the house while he was having that surgery. So there was just so much up in the air because we'd got a new rental that was like a bigger house with bigger land. And, you know, obviously that comes with more money, but then he's just been diagnosed. So I landed back in that house on the surgery night, the new house. And, you know, all the boxes are there. And I just realised it wasn't suitable for him to come home with, it was like a private rental, and it just, a lot of promises that were promised weren't followed through. And, you know, I soon realised that it wasn't clean or healthy enough for him to come back and heal in. So I was like, we need another house and we need it now. And, you know, he's in, like, if we've got a week that he's going to be in there, and I need to find a new rental. So I was juggling looking at rentals, finding a rental, the kids and him being in, healing. And I found a rental. There was a period where I think we had to stay at my mum's unit. She has a 1-bedroom unit for, I think, 2 nights until we could land in the new rental that we got. That was a lot newer and cleaner for him to kind of heal in. So that was a kind of just timing. Like the timing was just off. But anyways, yeah. And we were just waiting for the diagnosis. So we got a phone call to say that it was a grade 3 oleodendroglioma, and that what they think is at the back is even a higher grade, but they can't know for sure, but they're just going to go off the MRIs and just keep an eye on the site with the MRIs I think at that point, my memory is really bad, but it might have been like every 12 weeks or something like that, they MRI, just to keep an eye on what's left behind, and then that we had to come in a couple of weeks and we will have to see the oncologist. And obviously all these words at that point are like, oncologist, okay, he's got cancer. Like, no one ever sits down with you and just says, this is what's happening. You just get random phone calls from registers, and, you know, you get oleodendroglioma. Okay, what is that? Like, is this a really bad one? Is this not? Like, just, I remember having no idea, and and the grading of it all. But basically they just said, you know, you'll get a phone call soon from this suite, which will be the oncologist, and then you'll get, you know, radiation was thrown out there and chemo was thrown out there, but nothing was ever said. So they're like, just wait for your phone calls kind of thing. And at this point, you know, I'm juicing for him every day. We've changed the diet already. I'm getting organic food. So I've already started the ball of like just doing what naturally I could do at the time, which was just, all I thought was like getting him healthy food, juices, and, you know, researching. Like, that's all you can really do in that time, and not try not to stress too much, because, you know, your world's just been flipped. And at this point, you know, you still got to be paying your rent, and he's not working, and, you know, you've got that whole side of like, I can't just jump into a job. Like it was real. And we didn't have that family. You know, I had my mum who helped as much as she could at the time, but she was working full time as well, and, you know, she had her bills to pay, and then all of Diego's family were in Argentina. So it was a really hard period of time, and I think a few people did organize like a GoFundMe at that time to just help a little bit with like funds and treatments and rent at that point, because it was just so sudden. And I guess we just waited for those phone calls and going into the hospital to have those meetings, and them just be so blasé. Like, you're still kind of just trying to rationalize what is going on. You know, next minute you're in an oncology ward, and I'm like, okay, like,
is this the oncologist we love so much?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just, they're just so cold, and like, it just feels so like you're a number. It's insane when I look back, and little did I know it was going to get so much worse than that. But so basically they just discussed, you know, we think that you should do radiation and chemotherapy, and you know, that's going to give you the best shot. You probably have anywhere between 3 and 5 years. This is with radiation and chemo, so if you don't do that, we can't really tell you a time frame. And that's kind of how they talk to you. Like, it's just so blasé. It's like, and I just remember thinking, like, before this, we always spoke about, I don't know, we always looked at like natural health and our own ideas around chemotherapy if any of us was to get cancer, and we always were like, we would never do chemo. You know, like, we just had it in our brain. And I think when something like that happens and you have kids, you do kind of second guess, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, you know, but they wanted to start with radiation first, and the chemo kind of changed a little bit. It went from like PCV, I think it is, which is like, you know, being injected where you go in, or then there was also a new one, TMZ, I think it is, which is like more like a tablet. So like those things were getting thrown around. So obviously the injection is a lot stronger and it has a lot more side effects, as they were trying to tell us that the TMZ, the oral one, had a lot less side effects, but it also doesn't have as much studies behind it with his type of cancer as well. And, you know, they couldn't really give us twos and fro's. So we started, it took us a while to agree, but he did do radiation. So it was every day for, gosh, I can't even remember.
Weeks.
Yeah, like weeks.
Weeks, yeah.
I just remember going there every single day, every morning with the kids as well. Like, I had no one to watch them, so we always went in with the kids. So yeah, he would go in for radiation, and that was quite scary because we just didn't really know what to expect either, you know, because it was like kind of going against our gut too, because obviously with radiation, like I must admit the radiation oncologist was probably the first person we spoke to that kind of would sit down and have a conversation with us, and kind of I remember even asking him questions about the cancer, like, because I was like, oh, someone's actually speaking to us, because it's almost like the radiation is like a different I don't know, like a different business structure within the hospital. Have you been in there? Like the Ion Centre, I think.
Icon?
Yeah, Icon. Yeah.
No, we didn't go to Icon. We went
yeah. So like it's like a whole different like section within the hospital. So like almost like they do private as well. So they just like treated you.
We had a very bad experience at Icon.
Yeah. Well, like obviously it wasn't amazing either.
Yeah.
But for what we were going through, it was like, oh, someone's actually just speaking to me. But it was still cold and I was still quite rude. But at that point, it was, you know, I had a little bit. So they did tell you that, you know, with radiation, you are going to kill some good cells of the brain because they can't target it that perfectly. And especially like the size of his, it's like a lot bigger area. Like we're talking a huge mass of his. So it was covering, like they were almost like, should we do it? Should we not do it? You know, like, so it was a bit scary. But they just made you feel like if we're not doing chemo, we have to do something. Like we have the kids. So it was just really scary and just going against, I guess, our gut, but he did it. So he kind of smashed it out, and he was also doing a lot of started doing like CBD oils and THC paste to support himself through that. We were also doing a lot of supplements, even though they tell you at the time they like you to not do anything, like vitamin C and like all the things, you know, don't do. But we just followed our gut and just wanted to support him, inflammation, you know, all the things with that come with radiation. And to be honest, he did really well. He did a lot better than they thought he would do because he wasn't vomiting. Like they were kind of prepping us at the end of like, this is big, like it's a big mass that we're doing. But yeah, he kind of almost sailed through it to a degree. He got fatigued towards the end. He got really red, like his head looked horrible, like sunburn but really intense, and he was definitely fatigued by the end, like he was falling asleep in the day. Like that was really scary to watch because you just don't know what's happening, but he kind of sailed through in comparison. And I just remember after that we went on like a little holiday. It was like we never went on holidays, but we were like, let's just go. Like it was like a little farmhouse up in the Sunshine Coast, and I think it was only like 4 days or something, but it was just like this little thing that we could do with the kids. And we went there, and I just remember at that time also it was the sweetest little cottage with, you know, a veggie garden, and I just remember going, I want to live in a place like this. Like it was my dream little cottage, and the chickens and the kids had fun. And I remember at this point though, Diego started to like drop things, so he would like pick up a mug and it would just drop on the floor, and we were just like, why is he dropping? Like my brain was just like, what's going on? Is this normal? But I think I did a bit of research, and I think I was on like some brain tumor groups at this point because it's still also fresh with me, and it's just the fact that there's swelling from the radiation that is then affecting other parts of his brain. So he was like, you know, he was starting to drop things, and like his coordination in his arms was starting to play up. And
did they do any scans after the radiation?
I had to wait. I can't remember the wait period, but there was a wait between radiation and, because like that's how they would also test if like the radiation had worked, you know. But what I didn't realize is it still keeps working over time. So it's not like the minute you stop your radiation, you're like, that's your progress and that's what it's done. It's like it continues to work. So it continues to fry the brain. And that's the scary part, because symptoms will come 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the track from radiation, and no one tells you that. And that moment that I realized after radiation that this is a thing, and also necrosis, I don't know how you say it properly, but it's basically like dead tissues in the brain, which also then causes almost like a tumor-like lit up section on your scans. So I don't know if it was like 8 weeks. There's a certain period of time that you have to wait for to have your first scan after radiation. So we went on our little holiday. He was dropping things and he was tired, and I was really scared inside. Like I was like, you know, it's all new to me. But you're not really seeing anybody else in this time. The hospital doesn't contact you. You're kind of just on your own, winging it, you know. And
hoping for the best.
Yeah, like life goes on almost, but it doesn't. Like he can't work, I'm not working, and we still have the babies. And we go to that scan, and there was a significant reduction in the whatever tumor was left there, but obviously not all of it, but it did reduce. And at this point there wasn't much talk of necrosis. So then at that point they were like, we're going to keep scanning him. I think it's every 3 months, like every 12 weeks. So it was just like, go live your life and we're going to keep scanning you, you know. But little did I know, and I was learning at the time, was that having the radiation, side effects will keep coming, you know. And that kind of scared me, because I was like, if we're already at this point, what's it going to look like in a year's time, like, you know. But they were like, no, this is good. So then obviously we're kind of living our life to a degree, which still kind of, Diego was quite fatigued, to be honest. He was quite wiped out. Like, he would be having day naps, falling asleep. At this time, I'm still researching other treatments, because he's still got cancer at the end of the day. Yeah, so it was, I found a good source of cannabis, which that, you know, all these things take a long time, because it's not straightforward. I'm not just going to go get Yoblo off the street. Like, your husband's got cancer, and it's like there's all this conflicting advice, and all I knew was that I think, you know, brain cancer tends to do well with the cannabis, as like I'd heard really good things. So that was just something that I knew that was relatively easy to access. And so between that and still researching everything else, I think, you know, people were throwing around all sorts of ideas and therapies and treatments, you know, like the Gerson therapy and things like that. And me and Diego had actually sat down and watched one of those documentaries prior to all of this, and, you know, looking at alternatives, because we found them quite interesting. And, you know, you hear some beautiful stories. But I even remember speaking to like a Gerson, I think they had like special therapists all over the world you can kind of speak to, and these people are hard to get into, and everything costs a lot of money. So what, you know, you're talking to different naturopaths that are recommended, different healers, different people that do different therapies. There was so many different therapies for cancer, and even just brain is like in a whole different ball game itself. So we got really close to thinking maybe Gerson would be, you know, a good thing to do, and because obviously it's one of those ones that everyone just kind of thinks they throw at you. And I soon learnt, like, when you look into Gerson a lot, at the bottom there's like a few cancers that kind of contradict, like you shouldn't take, and brain cancer was one of them. And I don't know if it was the high fats. Juicing and
sugar.
So, you know, keto gets thrown around, and then it's like, do you do it with me, do you do it without me? So it's kind of like, my brain is just mush, and I'm doing this with no, like, I have no background, and a few people, like, I was trying to find a naturopath that, you know, worked with cancer, and then specifically maybe even brain cancer, because, you know, cancer is such a broad spectrum, and I think people forget that there's like all of these places and all of these therapies, and, you know, like, their auntie might have had a good run, or, you know, their uncle or whatever, but we're all dealing with different people, let alone different cancers. And I soon learnt quite fast that brain tends to be a little bit different than a lot as well. And so Gerson and juicing and all of these things that people were telling me to do was like, no, don't do it, because it actually could be bad. And you know, you could actually get growth. So then it's realizing, oh my gosh, like, there's so much in it that I don't even know where to begin, and also financially begin. Like, that started to become really overwhelming, because, you know, you want to do all you can, but when you're limited to funds, you know, you've seen 3 different naturopaths that are giving you 3 different recommendations, and then, you know, like, testing is thousands, you know, like, there's a lot of testing that can be done, but it all comes at money. And so, you know, the basics that I was doing at this point was the cannabis. We were doing like an infrared sauna. We didn't have one ourselves, so we were just going and paying for that at that time. Meditations, he was getting on his phone and doing those kinds of things. A lot of downtime, obviously no pressure to go back to work, because he was healing. So it was just, we just thought, getting the mind in the right place, doing his daily meditations, you know, time out in the sun, eating well, still trying to work out what the best thing was to do. You know, like, do we eat meat? Do we not? Do we cut out eggs? Do we, you know, like, it was just constant, almost winging it, because I didn't know what was right. And even different practitioners would have something different to say. And it was just really, really confusing and really, really hard. And then, like, even, you know, like, overseas clinics were brought up, but it was just like, we just don't have the money at this point. And we were just kind of getting by, I guess, and paying the rent, and, you know, buying organic, and just trying to do the things that we could do, basically, that didn't really come at a huge cost. So that's kind of where we were for a while there, and he was getting regular scans every 3 months, and at this stage they were stable. The scans were pretty stable, like, nothing, there was still cancer there, but it wasn't growing, it wasn't, you know, nothing was happening, so that was kind of quite good. So we were just kind of winging all the other therapies. The only thing, as I said, that he was doing was he was taking really high doses of THC, which would kind of wipe him out, but also he found it quite good as well with, like, sleep and, you know, pain and healing and all of those kinds of things, and definitely helped the whole radiation process. And then we had been in this place, come up quite quickly, like 6 months in this new place, and that's when we realised funds were running tight and we're going to have to move, or we re-sign a lease here, and we just couldn't afford it. So that's when we started to look at, you know, trying to find a cheaper rental, and eventually it landed us out in Beaudesert. So it's quite rural. It was quite sweet when we found it, because, you know, going back to our little holiday that we had not that long before that, it's kind of like manifesting that beautiful home. Like, it was a sweet little cottage, you know, white picket fence, we could have chickens, we could do the veggie garden, and it was all the good things that Diego could do as well with his time and as far as healing. So it's just us. We don't have any family, so I didn't feel like we were losing anything by being out that far at the time, and, you know, rent is a lot cheaper out there, so that was our main priority. So we basically moved out that way, and at this point his scans were still stable, and yeah, we decided to move out to Beaudesert and get settled there, and hopefully get the kids settled out there without me realizing just how isolated it was going to become. So we did move, and also felt pregnant at the same time with folk, so obviously not planned. I remember I've gone on, like, if anyone that follows me, I've spoken about it before, on how, like, I had a really big breakdown with Diego's cancer and the fear of being alone, and my fear of men, and, like, just, you know, Diego being my person and how connected we were, and just the fact that, yeah, I was just petrified to be alone. And I just remember, in a nutshell, it was like I had a vision once of speaking to Diego, and he handed me a baby boy, and he was like, "You're going to be okay," and he died. And it was like an awake dream, and it was so vivid. Anyways, 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant, and we didn't find out the sex, and it wasn't planned, and it's kind of like, how did this even happen? But it did kind of hit me, and that vision kind of hit me as well, of like, oh my gosh, is he dying? Like, there's a bigger picture to this? Like, you know, so we didn't find out the sex, and it was quite, you know, all the emotions running through, like, oh my God, we're barely affording life, and I'm about to bring another one in. So it was huge. So it was very conflicting feelings of, pregnancy is always beautiful, and another child is amazing, and in an ideal world without cancer we probably would have had a big family, but, you know, it was kind of like, can we afford this, can we do this, can I do this, but we got to do this. So yeah, so we kind of embraced, I guess, the pregnancy after a while, and, you know, got into the garden, doing the veggies, like, it just became Diego's therapy. So he became really big in gardening, and that's kind of where we spent every day, while still, you know, doing all the things that we were doing. And we thought, well, we must be doing something right, because it's not growing. And at this point we still hadn't done chemo either. So yeah, and then, you know, I would have been maybe like 6 months pregnant, maybe, I can't remember the exact time frame, but, you know, next scan rolls around, and yeah, then we went in for the results, and they were like, oh, actually, like, we saw a register, because this is another thing, you go in for your results, you're waiting in the hospital for hours and hours, you're a number, you know, when you go for your results, it's never nice, they're never friendly, sometimes it's via phone, sometimes you're going in there and you're waiting hours and hours to be seen, to just be like, yep, no, fine, goodbye. Like, you know, it's very, you know, do you have any new symptoms, those kinds of things. And this one time we were in waiting forever again, and we saw a register, and he was like, you could tell that we'd been the last to be seen in the day. We'd been waiting for hours, and I was just getting so over it, because we still had the kids. So it was just a lot, and you could tell he was just bringing up Diego's file, and he's like, no, it's fine. Like, if anything, it actually looks like it's shrunk. Like, this is crazy. Like, whatever you're doing is working, you know? So they stopped the pressure of, like, chemo and all of the things. They're like, it's like, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it, kind of thing. Almost a little bit patronizing, but there's a bit of truth behind it. So I was like, okay, this is great. We walked out. And then 2 weeks later, we get a phone call, and he had to go into another section of the hospital. We had no idea what it was. And when we got there, we sat down. It's an oncology ward. We were like, why? Because we were still seeing the neurosurgeons for, like, the follow-up of the scans, not the oncology, I guess. So the oncologist was the new thing for us. It was a medical oncologist. So we go in, we wait. We go in, and we sit down, and he's like, starts talking to us like, you know why you're here, right? And we're kind of like looking at each other like, we're really confused. Why are we here? We only just got told 2 weeks ago that, if anything, there could be possible shrinkage. And he was like, oh no, you've got the wrong idea. You've actually got growth. And I don't know how far pregnant I was. Maybe, I'm thinking maybe like 6 months, or maybe even longer, further along. And Diego was getting a bit more fatigued, but, like, nothing really jumped out at us. And he just basically said, no, you're here because we need to talk about chemo, because it's grown, and at this rate you've got probably less than 6 months to live. And we've just gone from, if anything, it's got shrinkage, to you've now got crazy growth and you should be scared. And I was just, I don't even think I cried. I think I was just numb. I was just like, what's actually happening? And I had so much anger because of all of the treatment that we'd had this whole time, and just how horrible it is, you know, like when you're a young family dealing with cancer and no one really sits down and talks to you or treats you okay. I was just like, this is enough. Like, I've had enough, you know. And I would go back to my GP and always try and get her to follow up things so she could explain things in the best she could, because she was amazing to explain things. So without her, I don't know where I would have been so much earlier on. But yeah, so we kind of sitting there and he starts rattling off about chemo, and that's really our only option, and without it, he's not going to live. And at this point, we don't even know whether he will live to see the birth of Folk. So that was quite confronting, and I just saw Diego felt so defeated, and chatting about chemo options and, you know, what to do. And they just put on a lot of pressure, you know, at this point. They would just say all the big nasty things and all the things that can go wrong. And, you know, there is a part of me going, okay, but he's quite well at the moment. And if I'm going to put him under that, like, how much longer is he going to get out of it with the chemo? And they could never really say. And at this point it had changed, and I was like, well, maybe 12 months with chemo, maybe 6 months without. And I was like, well, are we going to spend our last amount of time sick and all of the side effects? Like, it just doesn't, like, we're just trying to weigh up our options, but at the same time we were shitting ourselves, because it's just, I'm pregnant. Like, it's just like, we still have 3 little kids at home, and it was big. So we were like, can we just sit on it for a bit, because this has just completely taken us. We just weren't expecting this. This is a big shock, and like, it's also unfair, and how did this even happen? How are we given these results, and then now we're getting this one, and like, how is this even happening? And so we went home, and they're like, yep, we'll call you. You also, now that you're on the oncology ward, you will get like a nurse, like an oncology nurse. So you don't really get to speak to him, but you can just call the nurse at any time. And so they would call us, and we kept trying to pressure Diego into getting chemo in as soon as possible. And I remember Diego just wasn't keen for chemo. He's just like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to, you know, all the things. And even if with chemo, they're still saying that he hasn't got much time. So it was really hard. And I can't remember exactly what we did here, because then we were like, what else can we do? Are we going to fly somewhere to one of these clinics? But then brain cancer doesn't have the best reputation with them, and we've been following a few people that had done some in like Germany, and then, you know, the cancer comes back and they've just got no funds, and we're going to have to, you know, crowd fundraise. So we were like, what do we do? And then, you know, Charlie came up as well, which is, you know, a brain surgeon that had been brought up a fair bit. But when Diego had his first operation, it was just so quick. You just did what you did. Like, you're in, they're doing it. Like, I didn't think, oh, I should shop around for surgeons, which I wish I had of. But, so anyways, Charlie Teo came up, and I was like, you know, maybe it's time to actually have a consult with him. You know, like, it does sound crazy, because also, mind you, I was pregnant, but COVID had started. So we were dealing with the hospital, we were dealing with COVID, we were dealing with pregnancy. So I was just like, what do we do? You know? And I think we ended up, long story short, having a consult with Charlie, phone consult, because he is in Sydney. He operates from Sydney at this point. And he basically said, you know, I think I've got a chance to get it out. It is bad, but yeah, I really do think I can. And, you know, then we chatted fees and, you know, what can go wrong. And he was like the first surgeon that I'd spoke to that was like, treated us like we were human. He was just like talking to anybody else. There was no like ego, there was nothing. So it was refreshing speaking to him, but also obviously very aware that it comes with a big cost. And, you know, COVID, Sydney, pregnancy, all the things, and time. So he was like, he wasn't opposed to, in Diego's situation right now, to trying chemotherapy, because it was also trying to get a second opinion. Like, chemo scared the crap out of us. So we were like, are we doing the wrong thing or the right thing? Is this going to throw his body? Like, what do we do? So he wasn't going to do the intravenous chemo, so we decided to do the TMZ. So I think he did a few rounds of that. By this point, though, he didn't start. We kept pushing it out because they wanted us to start. And the oncologist at the hospital was like, there's no side effects to this stuff. Like, it's fine, it's good, we can have it around the kids. You know, we were co-sleeping, I was breastfeeding, I was pregnant. And chemo is a scary thing. It's quite toxic, right? It's like a category 1 or whatever they say. Like, it's, you get given in like this bag that has all the warnings all over it. You know, you have to wear gloves, like, you know, cleaning the toilet, all of the things, like, you know, how toxic it is. But this oncologist was like, no, they say all these things. You know, have you ever read a Panadol packet? Like, everything has side effects. My gut was like, this is not on, you know, it just doesn't seem right. anyways, so Diego kept pushing and pushing. We kept getting scans, and Diego kept pushing the chemo back. And I think I'm kind of lost in our time waves here, because I'm pretty sure there was like growth, like we had kind of like some growth and then some, you know, non-growth, because then we started, what we did start before we started chemo was the hyperbaric. So we picked up the ball again, because we had dropped the ball, mind you. When he got this growth, I guess, you know, time, it takes time, and maybe you're not as on top of things. So like there was certain things like organic produce, certain treatments, certain saunas that we kind of maybe had cut down a bit, even taking the cannabis, we're not being as strict. So we're like, all right, let's pull it all back together, do as much as we can. So we added hyperbaric. He was doing that 3 times a week at the beginning. As, I don't know if people are aware, but it's very expensive, like thousands of dollars. And I think at this point I'd probably spent maybe $20,000 just on cannabis. So like, money's just getting chewed. You know, to see a therapist or a naturopath, you're paying like $300-400. That's without supplements and without testing. So like, we had chewed through, I don't even know, $100,000. Like I don't even know. Like I wish I had have kept a track of that, but money's flying out the door, and we're just like, we just have to do what we have to do. Hyperbaric, picked up the cannabis, picked up the diet, and just went full steam ahead, and kept saying that we will do the chemo, but once the baby is born, because we don't want to do it now. So we had folk. Diego made it. I just remember looking back at photos, and he was so thin, but it was such a beautiful moment. It was the best birth. So good for the both of us. But in this time he decided to then start the chemo, because, you know, he's getting pressured. They would call and they'd be like, you really need to get onto this. So he's like, all right, let's do it. Now I just remember like the first night of him taking it, I felt sick. Like we were still on that point of like looking at each other on the couch, like watching a movie or something, and I was just like, don't take it, don't take it. Like we were just like, I bawled my eyes out when he first took the first chemo tablet, because it just went against everything we ever thought we would go. Like it's just like, I can't believe we're here, you know, but you're so scared. And you could see that he was sick, you know, like he was so thin. And we just weren't sure whether we could get the money together for Charlie Tio. So I think it was about $150,000 or $130,000 that we had to raise to get the surgery with him. So long story short, tried the chemo, and it just made him feel crap, and he was getting really bad night sweats. And I'd had a newborn baby. I was in the bed with him, and I just remember him soaking the bed, and I was like, this intuition, like this just doesn't feel right. I spoke to my GP, and I was like, you know, they told us that there's absolutely no side effects to this, even down to like making out and bodily fluids, like it's safe, Hayley. And I was like, this just doesn't seem right. Like I don't think it is. Like, because Diego went and picked up around at the chemist in the hospital, and he's like, mentioned it to him that he's got night sweats, and you know, how bad is this? And he's like, have they not told you? It's highly, highly toxic. Like you have to keep it away from all kids, keep it away from your partner, like sleep in a different bed. And I spoke to my GP, and I was just like, oh my God, is this true? Like I've just had a newborn baby, and we've all been sleeping in the same bed. Like what is going on? And she's like, yeah, no, don't. The oncologist who's prescribing this med still would tell me that it was safe. So we're getting all this conflicting advice, you know, mind you, it's just adding to the hospital nightmare and my stress of just what is right, what is wrong, what are we doing? But the pharmacists were just adamant. They were like, do not sleep in it. You have to sleep in your own bed when you're on that. I think it's like a week on, week off. I can't exactly remember how it went when he was taking it, but highly toxic, really, really bad. So that was a big thing, and obviously guilt, because you have a baby and you're like, what damage have I done? Like, what's going on? But anyways, he was just getting really unwell. He didn't like it. He was getting sicker. It was awful. So he decided to pull the pin. He's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't do it. And just fully picked up, still doing the hyperbaric, doing all the things. So we would drive 3 times a week onto the Gold Coast, which would take an hour each way. So we were probably gone, I don't know, like all around 5 hours, 3 days a week with the kids. So they weren't going to school. There was like, I couldn't get them to school. I didn't have anyone to pick them up. I didn't have anyone to drop them off. There was no one out there that I knew that would do that. It was like I feel like the kids kind of grew up in the car. I mean, they were good in the car. I guess they had to be, because we just lived in the car. We just lived for him, like getting him his treatments and getting him what he needed. And he would go in for 2 hours in hyperbaric, and we would just wait in the car or go to the park depending on the weather. And, you know, I still had to wing 3 kids and a newborn baby at this time. So it it was a lot, and I just felt isolated because by this point, friends had dropped off. We'd been living in Beaudesert in our bubble because I was in a bubble and maybe I wasn't putting in my effort, but I was trying to save my husband's life with 4 babies, and I feel like your friendships just fall apart. Yeah, that was really, really hard, I think, and took a massive toll. But mind you, in all of this, we decided to crowdfund and get this money for Charlie and keep doing all the things he was doing. Once he got off the chemo, he almost picked up a little bit and just kept doing all of those things that we could afford, raising funds at this point, made an appointment, a booking with Charlie to have surgery done. And, you know, as we were getting closer to the target, and, you know, the community, the online community, like, you have this love-hate relationship with social media. Like, you know, there's all the bad, but they're what got me through in such a big way, like emotionally, mentally, financially. Strangers, you know, like, if you can't rely on friends, you have no family, these people become like your support people in the back. Like, it's just, I can't even believe how big of a support they were. And I think it was just so much more than I got on at night and I didn't have anyone to talk to, so like people would message me and check in and be like, how are you, you know. And then it started to go and spread to raise this money, and still doing all of the things. And it's we got really close, and then also we had a scan, and Diego went for the scan, got the results back, and there was shrinkage. And we went into the oncologist to get the results at this point, and he was shocked. He was just like, I don't know how that happened, because obviously he didn't believe in hyperbaric. He didn't believe in all of the things we were doing. He thought we were crazy people. And we kept it really, like, we didn't talk about what we were doing. We didn't boast. There was no ego. We were so quiet in there and polite. But, you know, they just make you feel like an idiot. And he's like, you know what, I have to give you credit. Like, it shrunk. But we'd already booked Charlie. We were only, like, I think, like, weeks out from Charlie's surgery. And, you know, it wasn't gone. But that's still something, which goes to show something we were doing was working. But we didn't know what. And you know what, we couldn't hold on to that forever. Because there was a moment of, like, do we cancel this? But we couldn't have afforded doing what we were doing for much longer. You know, like, hyperbaric, I think, from memory, it's about 150 an hour. He was doing 6 hours a week. You know, that's just that.
And that's a cheap rate.
Exactly. Like, at this point, we were getting very looked after.
Yeah.
That was their way of contributing to us as a family, you know, when the GoFundMe was going around. So, beautiful people, that was their way of helping us out. But I think standard's about $250 an hour. So it's really hard for people to access, like, to be able to get this kind of stuff. You know, we're still a family. I don't even know how we're paying rent at this point. Like, it's a lot. But we knew something we were doing was helping, you know, and you hear these stories, but you just can't go on like that forever. So we're like, well, we have to go to Charlie. COVID's going on. It was a big deal to get down there, get someone to watch the 2 big kids. I was going to take Folk, who by this point he would have been close to 6 months. I think he was not even crawling. And I had Inca, who was 2 maybe. So they were still really little. And I didn't even think about how scary it was to get on a plane with him to go down and have surgery. And we just booked this little, like, hotel in Sydney across from the hospital. But, you know, we didn't know whether we were going to get in, like, on the day, like, with the whole COVID restrictions that they had going on. And then you got to land and get in, and it's just this huge process. And also, that, you know, people that followed would have remembered that they upped the hospital, not Charlie, the hospital upped the fees by like 30,000 2 days before the surgery. They wanted another 30 grand. It was just like so many things that could go wrong, you know. But surgery happened, we got there. But once we had got there, I'd landed there, and, you know, he was going in, and I remember walking him in on that morning. I woke up at 5:30, but the kids couldn't go in because it was COVID, so it was like lockdown. And I didn't realise that they wouldn't let babies in even though I'm breastfeeding. And they wouldn't. So I was like calling whoever, like, people on social media were like calling other people, like, trying to find a nanny. And I'm in a hotel room, tiny little 1 bedroom, like, it's just like a bedroom and a toilet. There's not even a kitchen. And I just was trying to find a nanny, and I got a hold of one nanny, and I was like, you're going to have to sleep here the night. Be here, like, so I paid her to sleep above us, you know, like, I booked her a unit above us in the hotel, and she said, I need you here because I don't know when I'm going to need you. Am I going to need you for 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour? If something goes wrong, then what? but I'm leaving my babies with someone I don't even know to go and, you know, like, he needs me, they need me. I was still breastfeeding. He was under 6 months old.
Wow.
It was just horrific. And this lady turned out to be so beautiful, like a beautiful nanny. And also on top of that, someone from social media through somebody else lent me her car. So she wasn't far. She was in Bondi. She's like, come pick up the car and car seats. You can have it for as long as you need it. So like the power of social media and the power of like, I hadn't witnessed kindness like that. Like when I felt like I just lost all my friends, it was like strangers always stepped in, you know, like I didn't have like no one was calling me going, are you okay? Like I didn't have family going, is she okay? Like my mum had my kids and she struggles with them, so she had the 2 girls back home. It just was a mess, and it just felt so isolating, but at the same time you're just doing it, you know. And I just remember that morning, the morning of the surgery, because I think there was only 1 day between landing and him having surgery, and I just remembered, this is a big surgery, you know, this is a surgery that they wouldn't touch. They were like, we cannot operate. When they offered that chemo, that was like, there's no chance we're operating because it's just way too dangerous. And you know, obviously Charlie's background, everyone's like, you know, he takes risks and this is big, and you know, he was honest with, you know, the things that could go wrong, you know, being paralyzed, you know, all of the things that can go wrong with brain surgery. So that morning I remember waking up and Folk was little, and it's gonna make me emotional, but I still have it on video. I just remember like he was so good with the kids, like so hands-on, and so like if anyone knew him, he was just so affectionate. Like he was affectionate with me, he was affectionate with the kids. He would just like tickle their faces and their hands, and his bond that he had with Inca was just like, I've spoken about it so much on my page, but like it's just a bond that I just can't even explain, you know. Like she was born, like she knew that he had it, like she held his head after she was born and never let go, you know, like she was medicine for him. And I just have this little video that I captured that morning at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's just him tickling Folk, and Folk, like, you know when they're little and they just kind of like make the little noises, but you know they're trying to like interact, and it's like the sweetest video. But little did I know that like that was him, you know, like he was going in for surgery that morning and he wouldn't come back the same. Like, it's the last snippet I have of his essence, you know. I just think I wasn't prepared. I was prepared for him to come out and not be able to walk. I was prepared for him to be a vegetable. I was prepared for him to be blind, but I wasn't prepared for him not to be there, you know. I had no idea what was coming. But I also knew to savour it. Like I took a photo of him, and I took the video of him and Folk, and then I just left Folk and Inca with this lady and left to take Diego in to check him into surgery. So same thing, you know, you go in, COVID, so they make everything a nightmare, and I say goodbye to him and as he waits for the surgery. And there was also like, I felt comfortable in that hospital in the sense that it was Charlie compared to like what I had experienced. And I don't know if it's the private versus public either, you know, but like it just felt better. And you know, they'll call me when he's out, so that was a long wait. I went back to the babies, and the nanny was there, and you know, just chatting to her, and I think she went and had to sleep, and I just remember walking around with Inca and Folk, like I was wearing Folk, and I was just in the middle of Sydney not knowing where the hell I was, just no one to call, no one, like it was just awful. Got the phone call that he's okay and that I can come up into, you know, ICU, so the same thing again. And I go in and he's there, and this time around he's just not as responsive. Like he just, but you know, I just thought this is a huge surgery. You still don't get told at this point, you know, I don't get to see Charlie, so you still don't really know. You're like kind of like, so what's happened? How is he? You know, you want to know all these things.
Yeah.
But you can't. So it's kind of like, well, we don't really have this information. The doctors will do their rounds, but you kind of got to wing being there when the doctors, it's just like this constant stress and weight. And Diego just wasn't the same this time. Like he was really fidgety. He was just looking at him just wasn't the same. But I don't think I got hurt at that point, because I was just like, well, he's just come out of surgery. Like, don't have any expectations here, you know. And so I left, and I had to leave, go breastfeed, come back. And I think Charlie came around to do the rounds to check on him, and you know, at this point it's still really fresh. So he's just like, Diego, blah, blah, blah. He kind of told me that it went well, that he got everything, and that, you know, everything went to plan. And so, you know, obviously I'm super grateful for that. But yeah, I was just more concerned of Diego, and I think he'd spent, and then I couldn't really stay that long because it was COVID and it was Sydney and I had to breastfeed the babies and they weren't allowed in. So I kept coming back and forth, and all I wanted to do was just lay with him. Every time he had surgery, I just wanted to be there. Like, no one was there, you know? But I couldn't be because I had the babies as well. And he went back to the ward. I think this might have been late in the afternoon by this point, you know? So I had to go home and sleep, and it's just awful to leave him there. And then in the morning, he was back on the ward already. And I went in, and he's watching, like, I don't know, I used to say it's like that airplane jelly, you know, the video, and it's like this kid cartoon, airplane cartoon. And I walk in and he's awake, and he's watching this, and he doesn't even look at me, and my heart sinks, and I'm like trying to talk to him, like, how are you feeling? And he's just kind of like really vague but not making eye contact with me. And I'm trying to get anything out of him that I could without bursting into tears. You know, he's not asking about Inca. You know, I'm like, Inca misses you. He's just like non-responsive, like numb. And yeah, and then he picks up his phone and he starts to go onto Instagram, and he goes onto my page, my Instagram, and he starts like flicking through my Instagram and zooming into photos of my face on Instagram. And I'm like, that's like red flags. I'm like, what is he doing? Like, he's not even a big social media person. And I'm like, and not only that, he's on my page looking at, zooming into photos of me and the kids. And at that point, I knew something wasn't right. I'm just like, he's not here, you know? And like, his essence wasn't there. And then in comes Charlie in a register, and he's lovely. He's like cracking jokes, like, hey, Diego, like, he's just a beautiful human. And he goes, how are you, Hayley? And I just crumble. I'm just like, he's not talking to me. He won't even look at me. And he's like, he's on Instagram looking at photos of my face. And he's like, what's wrong with you, Diego? This is your beautiful wife. Look at your beautiful wife. Turn to your beautiful wife. Tell her you love her. And he like looked at me, just dead, like in the eyes. And I was just like a mess. I was crying. And he's like, come on, Diego, like, look outside. What's the weather outside? And Diego's like, sunny, like really short. And he's like, what's the date today, Diego? You know, like, and you could see that he just looked confused. He looked like a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And at that point I was just like, oh my gosh. And he's just like, oh, you know, this could happen. And then he tried to tell me that, you know, this, you know, with the surgery, it affects like the left and the right side and all of these things, and this can happen, but generally like the brain can rewire and he can get better. Like, this isn't going to be necessarily a long-term thing. Like empathy, like apathy, like his empathy was gone.
Yeah.
And he's like, how do you, by this point he'd been in there not even 24 hours. He's like, do you want to get out? Let's get you out of the hospital. And I was just like, okay, like, all right, this is crazy. Get him out and go back to the hotel room within 24 hours of having brain surgery. So then I'm landing, because he's like, you know, it's better to be out than in the hospital to heal. And I was happy, but also when I got back to the hospital, I was like, he's not back to the hotel, he's not talking to me. I've got a baby and a toddler, a nanny there. All they've given me is Panadol and a phone number and some stuff to remove stitches later on in his head, and we were meant to fly out like in a couple of days back home. And obviously the COVID thing, meanwhile I'm still trying to navigate letting them not making us quarantine, because at this point we were going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Oh yeah.
And so I was still battling the Queensland Health at this point. So I had Diego, I had the kids, and I was on the phone to them going, come on, this is our situation. He's had brain surgery. He can't quarantine in a little room. He needs to be at home. That's where he's going to heal. We're having complications. Like, just let us home, please. No. They wouldn't. So, long story short, I had booked an Airbnb, which is going to cost me $12,000 for 2 weeks in Kingscliff, which is right on the border, so that the girls could come over the border and stay with us, because we've been away from the girls as well, and it just, none of it made sense. But in that time, Charlie also offered, of course I'm having a mental blank of what it was called, but it's like a therapy to the brain, like the TMZ, what's it called?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm just having a real mental
It's like a
blank.
TENS machine on the
Yeah,
brain.
like a TENS machine. If you visualize it like that, like a TENS machine on the brain, has really good results with like rewiring, refiring networks of the brain. That was the idea, basically, because he had become the way he had become, like lack of empathy and, you know, quite numb and robotic. They were like, if we're stimulating the brain.
Yeah.
So many sessions of that. So we were like, all right, let's push our tickets back. Let's get this done while we're here in Sydney, and then we're going to go to this Airbnb. So to fly from Sydney to the Airbnb, he had that done. Mind you, I still had a friend's car at that point. And then we flew back to the Airbnb just to heal, you know. And at this point, we're in the Airbnb, and he's still not talking to me, not making conversation, but yet he had to meet the big girls. And I could see Inca could feel it. Inca would cry, and she would say to me, you know, where's Daddy? Why isn't Daddy holding me? That was her big thing when he came out of surgery, because he's always held her. She was like, Daddy won't hold me. Like, he was quite mean. So that was, but she was 2, so she, you know, it was a little bit easier in some ways, but I was petrified because Luna and Millie were older, and I'm like, they're gonna see this. Like, how am I even gonna get around this? But, you know, it's still it's fresh to see. You still have hope. You have hope. And, yeah, he was very numb and frustrated and irritated with them and wanted to sleep in a bedroom on his own. He wouldn't want to sleep in bed with me. And I'm just like, I feel like I had the pressure of everyone paying that amount of money to have surgery, that everyone wanted me to be positive. You know, like, no one wanted to hear that I was petrified. No one wanted to hear that, like, my husband's gone. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's almost like no one cared. It's like, we got you over the line and you've got the surgery, good luck. Like, it was quite isolating and quite awful, and no one could really understand what I was going through, but I had to be positive because we did just spend this much money and the cancer's gone, right? So we're like, he's cancer free, Hayley, like, there's a positive. And I'm like, yeah, but my husband's gone. Like, but I still didn't dwell on it. I just had hope. I was like, he's going to come back, it's just short, you know. But yeah, he was really short with the kids, couldn't communicate. And we spent a week there, and what do you know, the borders opened. So I booked the 2, they opened in a week. So we could go home, but we'd paid $11,000 to stay here. It was a beautiful Airbnb with a pool. So I was like, well, if he's healing, this is beautiful, let's just stay here. The kids can swim. So they just, if they were there, they were distracted. They were just lived in the pool. And he just kind of sat to himself and didn't really speak to us. And I remember removing his stitches. No one told me. It was just like removing his stitches in the Airbnb, and then we made our way home to heal from that, I guess. So we still upkept, you know, his diet and the cannabis. There's still all the healing things that he needed, because he just, not only the cancer, but he also had brain surgery. So we're still doing all of the things that we could afford to keep him healthy. And, you know, each day it was different. It was like, you know, all of a sudden he was like eating the kids' food, you know, speaking to them like crap. Like, you know, most before you would like get your kids' meals ready, and you would eat last, you know, but he wouldn't. He would like, I'd put the food out and he would eat their food, and then they would cry. And they'd be like, Dad's eating our food. And like, the whole environment was just different. He didn't step foot in the garden. Like, so I took over the garden, and he just, because I wanted to like hold on to it and keep it alive for him, because it was like his love. It wasn't like I was forcing that upon him. It was just like, I knew how much he loved and lived and breathed in that garden. And then he just didn't want a bar of it. It was just like, who is this person next to me? Like, I was mortified. And I remember catching up with some girlfriends for the first time after, and even that was a shock, because it was like, well, how is it? And I was like, well, if you're going to be honest, you're going to be honest with your friends, right? And I was just like, yeah, the surgery, they got the cancer, as far as we know, that's all taken, because they were still doing like biopsies of what cancer they got out to, you know. So you're still waiting on some kind of testing and all the things, because he kind of does a little bit deeper testing than your general hospital.
Yeah.
So like markers of the cancer and all of these things. So that came back quite aggressive. Like, he called us and he said it's quite an aggressive cancer. Like, we're lucky we got it out. He wouldn't have had time, you know, all of the things. And yeah, still COVID's going crazy. Catch up with my friends, and you know, I was honest. I was like, you know, he's not the same. He's gone. Like, he's not there. And they were like, well, at least you got the surgery. And I was just like, there was no empathy for me as his wife and care and all the effort that I'd put into the fact that my husband was gone. Like, no one would acknowledge that. It was just like, it's all about Diego, which was fine, because of course it's all about Diego, but like, I'm still a human here in postpartum, like, still just falling apart that my husband's gone. And he'll be fine. Like, everyone just had hope and everyone just didn't really care, you know? But as time went on, nothing changed. He was the same. So then he started to see, he was seeing a therapist before this and also after surgery. So same therapist, so like a psychologist. And he was seeing her, and little did I know, he was also, what's the word? Perceiving things differently in the home and with me. Because obviously, you know, I'm seeing my side, which is he's not there. But he's obviously interpreting the kids differently. Like, the noise they make now irritates him. Probably who I am is irritating him. Like, he doesn't know. And he would obviously tell the therapist. And long story short, I got called in one day to the therapist. I would drive him. He couldn't drive in all this time. He can't, when you had a seizure, you're not allowed to drive. So, you know, years of me driving. So we drive, everything was on the Gold Coast. So it was always an hour away. Drove in with all the kids. And she wanted to see me. And I go in and sit down. And she's like, how are you? And I lost it. If anyone actually genuinely said, how are you? I would break. And I was just like, this is so hard. Like, and me and Diego had just had, not even an argument, but I've spoken about this briefly before, of where, like, you know, when you're in a partnership and, like, they leave towels all over the floor and there's, like, wet towels on the bed, you know, they get out of the shower, there's just the mess, right?
Yeah.
So I had the kids as well, and I'm just flustered, and I'm trying to get Diego to his appointment. I've got all the kids, and I'm like, F this, like, why are you leaving towels around? Like, what am I? Am I a maid, a slave? Like, come on, guys. And, like, clearly I shouldn't speak like this, but I'm at my wit's end, you know? Like, and when I speak to people, like friends, they're like, oh my God, every mum does that. Every mum has a moment, you know? This morning. And like, we never argued. Yeah. We never raised our voices at each other. We just never did. And we still hadn't been. Yeah. So, like, I'm still the same Hayley. The kids are still the same kids. But obviously, he got into therapy. She called me, asked me how I was. I'm crying mess. I'm watching the kids out the front, realising that he's out there with them and he can't watch them. If they run onto the road, like, she's not even registering this. And I'm, like, trying to be aware. And she's like, oh, I just want you to know that you're going to get a phone call that I've had to call child services. And I was just, like, mortified. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, my world is, like, what more could go wrong in my world? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, it's abuse. It's verbal abuse, what you're doing with Diego. And, like, she was serious. Like, she was like, it's mental abuse. And I'm like, what has he said? And he's like, oh, you know, that you're going to leave him, that, like, because there's towels on the bed and, like, all these things. And I'm just like, it's funny, almost funny to laugh now, right? But I was, like, petrified, because I was like, oh my God, no, I'm not leaving. But he's like, no, threatening to leave him. He doesn't want the kids, and, like, all this mental abuse. And I was just, like, crying, and I'm just like, I can't believe it. And I was almost, like, so upset and angry at Diego, like, what is going on? But then I didn't get angry at him, because I still knew that this wasn't his fault, even though the behaviours he was doing were horrendous. It's like, it's not his fault. Yeah. He's just had a quarter of his, like, so at this point he'd had his whole right lobe taken out, you know, and, like, there's so much to be grateful for, right? So she's telling me this, she's like, you know, I booked your appointment for your GP, you have to go see her. And at this point I'm like, thank God, because she knows me. Yeah. So, like, she's got my back. And then this woman has not even taken a second to get to know me, ask me how I am, ask how I'm coping, just straight up, I'm this mental abuser and that I'm now getting child services to come out. And I just listened to her. She's like, you're going to get a phone call, blah, blah, blah. She was so rude to me. And then I walk out and he's there, and, you know, as he comes back, you can tell he's a bit concerned, and I get in the car and I'm like a mess, trying to, you know, the kids are there, like, asking questions. And as I'm walking out, she yells out, not yells, but, like, quite loud, Diego, if anything happens when you get home, call the police. And I just could not believe what was, like, I've never raised my voice. Like, there's not one, I'm actually triggered by violence and by noise. So, like, I was just like, and that's when it clicked even more. And I was like, he's not perceiving. Yeah. There's nothing, like, this is way deeper than I thought it ever could be. So, I go to my GP the next day, and I'm a mess. She knows as well. She's like, Hayley, like, it's just been a big misunderstanding. I know you, I know Diego, like, this is a mess, and I'm sorry. Like, they're going to call you, but nothing's going to happen. Because, you know, in my head also, I'm like, I co-sleep. The kids sleep with me. Diego sleeps in the bed. Like, can I get in trouble for all of these things? Like, you know, like, when it comes to child services, like, what's going on? But long story short, they called me and they kind of cried with me. And they were like, they couldn't believe it. They were like, you've had no support. You've been given no support. Because at this point now he has a traumatic, like a TMI, like a traumatic brain injury. That, TBI. That, so now we're dealing with, not cancer, but we're dealing with a brain injury. So like he has a problem. And I've been given no support around what this could look like, what help you can get, like for the kids, for me. So, yeah, they came out, a lady came out, and she sat at the dining table and she was crying. She was like, I've just come from a house where they've got ice in the house and they can't even take the kids away. And I'm here with you and this is what's going on. She's like, this is disgusting. Like, they couldn't believe it. And this was a psychologist that had done all of this. And I'm just like, the damage that she's doing to our family. Like, Diego was like, I didn't mean this. I didn't, like, even though he wasn't there, he was like, I wasn't dobbing you in. And the poor guy, like, his brain wasn't interpreting things right, and he's not having support. Instead, the woman's calling child services, like we need that, you know. And it's just, yeah, it was a lot. And I guess it was just trying to navigate dealing with someone that just wasn't there anymore, you know. Like, it maybe got a little bit better, but he still wouldn't go near the garden, wouldn't do anything. And we're just still doing all of the treatments and all of the therapies and still trying to do a little bit of hyperbaric and things that we could afford just to keep, obviously we want to keep cancer away and the healing of it all. And he's meant to be having 3 monthly scans. The hospital didn't want to see us anymore because he'd had surgery with Charlie. So and obviously COVID was happening, so the scans just went out the window.
Really?
So he's not getting scanned. I'm calling them like, can we get a scan? He's due for a scan. He's meant to be scanned. No. They wouldn't really say why, but they were just like, no. And they would just say, I think they would just say they're full or they don't have time. And I'm like, but he's met. And you could just tell by the way they were treating us. They never said at that moment, you've gone to Charlie, but it was like so obvious the way they were doing it. It was almost like gaslighting. It was horrible. And I started to get a bit worried because he'd start to get a little bit tired and fatigued, and he was getting really unwell at one stage, and it was getting close to Christmas from memory. So it would have been, he had the operation in January, and this was like, you know, like the therapist and all of this thing went over for the year, you know, still trying to get him all the help we could get him, and trying to get access to NDIS at this point because he had a brain injury, and yeah, just trying to get support so that I didn't have to financially pay for all of these things like speech therapists and all these things that you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for. You can get NDIS. So we're trying to navigate that world, and being rural just wasn't easy. So at this point we still weren't getting support workers, any help with the kids. It's just me juggling the cancer, the whole thing with the kids. And so we're getting close to Christmas at this point, and he's going downhill. He's starting to sleep again. So obviously my red flags are like, cancer's back. Like, this isn't right. He's doing the same behaviours as when he had the cancer. Like, something's not right. My gut's just, this isn't good. And they wouldn't. I was calling the cancer nurse. I was calling them. They just would not scan him. I'm like, please just scan him. You know, like, scan him. Nope. And then he started to have seizure randomly one night. And, you know, in my head, I'm like, well, the cancer's gone. Why is he having a seizure? Like, you just put the dots together. You're like, what's going on? You know, ambulance comes. They take him in. They didn't scan him. They sent him back out again. It's COVID, so like I couldn't go with him this time. I couldn't get a hold of anybody. So that was really hard, because also remembering that he's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So I was like, he has no advocate. So I tried to get like, you know, as like compassionate grounds as his advocate. Couldn't. And that was really stressful. And at that point, I think I'd called Charlie to be like, you know, he's had a seizure. Do you know what? Like, so he's like, maybe we should just get him back on any seizure meds. This can happen when, I don't know, when the brain heals from the surgery, it shrinks and, you know, it's hit a nerve or whatever.
Yeah.
It's almost like an epilepsy type thing. So, like, let's just put him back on that. And still try and get these scans done. Like, they won't scan him. So you clearly operated. And then a little bit of time went on, and he started to get downhill. Like, he just started to not remember things, very dementia-like, falling over, couldn't walk properly. We're all having breakfast, and he has a full-blown seizure again. And he couldn't even get up. And, you know, seizures are so... Whenever he had them, they were very violent, very full-on. You never get used to them. The kids never get used to them, you know. And he had to go get bloods done. So he had like a minor, I guess like a smaller seizure, but came to, we needed to get his bloods done because mind you in all of this, the GP's trying to fast track and get things done because she's like, I want to try and help, but the hospital's not helping. And so I got him to the blood test. He fainted there, and I had the little ones with me, and I think she was mortified. She could see something was not right. And I was calling the hospital, mind you, telling them all of his symptoms, like the cancer nurse, the nurse that you're meant to, and they were just like blowing him. He'll be fine. He'll be this. He'll be that. Like, it was so obvious at this point that they were not going to see him or care for him. And I was petrified. I was like, what am I going to do? Like, what do I do? Is he going to die? Like, what's happening? No, they just were so nasty to me. Anyways, he had another fall and another seizure. I called the ambulance at this point. Still COVID. So, like, the ambulance came. And I think at this, it might have been that point, we actually thought that one of us had started to contract COVID at this point too. But the ambulance came in, took him, and I just said, look, can you please scan him? Because they're just not, they won't, we've had surgery with Charlie and they're just not, if he comes, and they're like, no, look, if we take him by ambulance, they have to take him in. I'm like, yeah, but they don't have to scan him. So I was like, please, can you just get him scanned? And they were really beautiful people. And I couldn't get in still because of COVID. And I was calling them. Anyways, I get a phone call and they said that he has a bleed on the brain and like a hematoma or something at this point. I think my GP might have even called me because she's amazing like that. And took him in. They said they're going to operate. So I went in. They were obviously allowed to let me in at that point. I don't really remember looking back, but I walk in and he's laying in bed and he's like half asleep at this point. Like, he didn't know who anyone was. And I moved his blankets and there was just shit everywhere. And at that point, I think I just was like, I don't even know, like numb. Like, am I witnessing this right now? Like, what is going on? Like, and I couldn't stir. I was like, Diego, what's wrong? Like, what have you done? And he was just delirious. Like, he was not conscious, at this point. And all I knew that he has a bleed on the brain. Why has he got a bleed on the brain? All they did was a CT scan. They wouldn't MRI him when he needed an MRI to check for growth. They were like, no, all we need is a CT scan to perform this surgery. So I went out to the nurse and I just said, look, he's made a mess. Can I get some help? And she's like, oh, I'll be in there soon. And she was just really rude to me. So I came in and then I went into the, like you have like a toilet, and it was just like, I'm talking everywhere. So like how long he'd been there like that, I don't know. But I started cleaning the bathroom and she came in because we couldn't physically move him to do the sheets. And like, I felt heartbroken for him because I was like, this is the first moment of like, I don't know, like it's degrading. Like he's a person, and he has no, like, I'm his person to help protect him, and I can't even be there to protect him, to stop him having to deal with those kinds of things. Like, that was a big fear of him. Like, I remember he was like, if I ever start like not being able to go to the toilet on my own or end up in a wheelchair, this is when he was normal. He was like, I don't want to be here, like it's just. So then when I'm witnessing this happen to him, I was just mortified, but I just knew that I had to be there. And then there's, I'm waiting for the surgeon to come in because still, you're not told anything. The surgeon comes in, it's the same surgeon from the beginning and the surgeon that also is very against Charlie. So obviously it's like, well, you're here because of Charlie. And I was just like, well, how? That was a year ago. How's a brain bleed today because of Charlie? And he's like, I don't know why brain bleeds happen. Because, in my head, I'm like, oh, do you know why? Like, what causes this? Like, me, I'm just like asking so kindly and so curiously. Like, I want to know what the hell's happening. He hasn't had a fall. He hasn't, like, what's happening? And he's like, I don't know, who knows? With a surgery like that, so reckless, who knows what's going on? Like, that's how he would speak to me. And then he just goes, so he's had a brain bleed, we need to do another operation, he'll be going in the morning, sign this consent form. And he had a register with him. And I just go, okay. My first thought was like, what kind of surgery? Is it the same? Is it a craniotomy where they like cut the skull, open the skull? And like, is it full? He's just had, this will be his third brain surgery, And like, what's the recovery like? Like, what are we talking? And he goes, no, it's different. And like, he would just be really short. And I was like, okay, but how's it different? And he's like, it's just different. But yes, we cut the skull open. So it's the same surgery. Obviously not as long or whatever, but he'll have drains coming out. He could have drains coming out to drain the bleed. He's like, but here, sign here. And I went to grab the forms, like, because he had a register there, and then he just picked up the forms and he literally threw them at me. So they landed like on me and all over the floor. And he goes, get her to sign them, and he stormed out. And I was just like, we were treated like we'd just robbed the hospital or something. Like, I just could not understand what was going on. And Diego couldn't consent. He was out. He was like asleep. He was gone. And I was like, is he even going to survive till tomorrow morning? Like, this is how they're just like leaving him. And the register just kind of looked completely awkward. I signed the forms and he takes them away. And at this point, everyone's like, you need to get a support worker. So I'm like trying to find a support worker. I'm trying to ask for a support worker. And I found one and I'm just crying. And I'm like, is he going to kill him? Like, at this point, I think that's the moment that broke me. So this was around Christmas time. And I remember having to leave because I still had the kids at home, breastfeeding, all of the things. And I was just going to quickly go home, feed, come back, and I called my GP because she gave me her personal number, and I just remember calling her, and I just go, he's got a brain bleed, they're going to operate tomorrow. He just threw I told her exactly what he said to me, like word for word at the time, because I remembered it, and I said, he threw this at me, and she's just like, oh my gosh, Hayley, like, I'm so sorry. I said, they're going to kill him. I'm like, I was adamant in my body that that this surgeon was going to kill him, like, just not have any care for him in the surgery. Like, I was petrified. I was shaking, and she's just like, he can't, Hayley, there's people in there, but I understand where you're coming from. Like, this is really bad. Like, when this is all over, I will help you. Like, this is not okay. I've witnessed this for far too long. And, I was like petrified. I did calm down. Obviously, I was just like shocked that a surgeon could treat me. Like, I was confused. I was like, we've been so nice, we've never questioned them, but when they do their rounds, like, everything just kept getting targeted at Charlie, and I was just like, I can't believe this is happening right now, but if he doesn't have surgery, he's going to die. This was like, I called the GP, was like, what can happen, like, can I get all this information? And she's like, he needs it. He's like, you can say no because you haven't given consent, because he didn't tell me, he wouldn't tell me what could go wrong. When you give it consent, they're meant to sit down and go, this can go wrong, that can go wrong, do you still want to do it? I was like, none of that. He threw the paperwork at me and told me to sign it. And she's like, well, technically you don't have to say yes because you haven't actually consented to the thing. He actually has to get consent from you, and that's not consent. But she's like, also, you're buying time. Like, he has a brain bleed. So, I'm not one to fight. So I'm like, okay, let's cross our fingers and hope that he doesn't die. And had the surgery. It was Christmas. We got out. And then, I started to go downhill. Like, I started to get really sick. Like, whether we caught COVID, like, this was December, January, we had New Year's, then January. Mind you, they still hadn't, I'll go back to the fact that they never MRI, like, they never scanned him. So at this point, why did he have a brain bleed? No one knows, no one cares by the sound of it. And I just remember looking at Diego, I'll go back to that. Like, I remember looking at Diego and going, something's not right. And, like, he was in the shower and he had, like, it was almost, like, puffy, but I was like, is this in my head? Like, down towards, like, his bum. And, like, his bum changed shape. And I was just, like, looking at him going, is it just because he's eating more? Because obviously when his personality changed, he could not get enough of food. Like, he couldn't say no to food. Like, he just would eat everyone's food. And, it was crazy. But I just remember looking at him in the shower once and I was like, it's going to sound really woohoo, but I was like, the cancer's back and it's down his spine. And I tried for so long to get the scans done, and I tried to tell them, this is what's happening. And because I think this moment that I'm talking about, like this, the spinal stuff was before the bleed. So it was even more reason as to come on, scan him, but they wouldn't. In this, before the brain bleed, the GP did order a CT scan. So she's like, I can do that. That won't cost you.
Yeah.
That was all come back okay. And so she was aware of my, like, I think it's down his spine. But the brain bleed happened. And I just had this feeling, and I was, looking, researching, and they were like, the hospital was saying, they were telling me, Hayley, it can't be. Like, there's no possible way. His type of cancer cannot go to the spine. It just does not happen. I'm like, yeah, it can, and it is. And they're like, no. And I was like, his symptoms were changing. He was getting more tired, all of the things, had the brain bleed. And this thing came up on one of the brain cancer groups, and it was like a PubMed about Diego's cancer, the same cancer he had. There was 2 studies where it had gone to the spine. And I remember looking at Diego one morning and I'm like, look, there's a study, Diego. And he was like, he just cried. Like, and that's another thing, that was another new thing that he had since surgery. He was very emotional. So even though he lost his empathy, he would cry over the drop of a hat. And that was not normal. Like, that wasn't him. And he just cried. And I was like, oh my God, I shouldn't have said that to him. Like, it was a moment of like, wow. So, like, I called the hospital, the cancer nurse again, and I'm like, it does happen. They were like, no, Hayley, it doesn't. I'm like, it's on PubMed. Do you want me to send it to you? Can you please scan him? They're like, nope. And he just started to get worse and worse, and, like, things were happening, and behaviours were changing, and we got COVID or something. We got a virus come around New Year's time. And, yeah, we just automatically assumed it was COVID. You know, the tests weren't out then at that point in time, and it wasn't easy to get tested, and did I have it? Did Diego have it? But his symptoms kind of correlated with the virus and, you know, like all of the stress. And I started to go, I dealt with whatever virus I had, but then I started to go downhill quite drastically at this point, and I'm still trying to fight to have him tested, but they wouldn't. So I'm trying to deal with my own health at this point. So my mum comes and starts staying with us because she lived on the Gold Coast, and to try and get him to his appointments and things that he needed, because I was getting really bad vertigo and head pressure to the point where my balance, where I couldn't even stand up and walk. So it was months of not being able to walk, and, you know, doing all the phone calls from bed and being really concerned about my health and my heart. So then I started to see specialists. So for my mum, it was taking me and the kids to go see specialists for me, and then still trying to do therapies for Diego, and trying to juggle the whole NDIS thing and trying to get, you know, all of that on board. And at this point, Diego's going downhill and I'm going downhill, and my brain fog is really, like, I've just never experienced the way I felt in my body at that time. Like, it's caused so much, almost like PTSD now, even thinking about how much and how scary that was. But as Diego started to decline, I was like, I've had enough. I'm calling Charlie again in Sydney, and I'm gonna pay for a scan. Like, let's just pay, do a whole spine, MRI and brain. It's probably about $1,000. And obviously at this point you'd think, oh, why didn't you just do this sooner? Like, we just didn't have $1,000. Like, we'd used everything and more that we'd had. You know, Diego didn't have life insurance, so there was no life insurance. There was no super life insurance on his super, so there was nowhere we could draw money from. You know, like, it was a big deal, and, like, especially when the hospital had a duty of care. So he'd missed, like, by this point, probably 4 scans, you know? So long story short, Charlie said yes. And he ordered a scan from afar. It was, like, private. So then we got the scan done up here privately. And we got a phone call from Charlie. And, yes, the cancer was back in his brain and all the way down his spine, down into the base of his spine, kind of where all the nerves go out the back of the spine. And it had a name because it kind of goes into, like, the coating of the brain as well, like the lining of the brain. And I think that's just, like, once it gets to that point, you just don't have time, you know. And I knew that spine cancer is a whole different ball game again, you know. But it was just, like, that moment of, like, I knew it. Like, I was right, and how do I tell Diego this? And like, this is it. What are we doing? Like, he's deteriorating at this point quite rapidly, to the point where he's not being able to walk. He doesn't remember things. Like, everything was coming quite fast, but at the same time, I could barely stand up. So, like, I didn't know how to juggle and how to deal with it all. And then you still have the kids, so you still have, you know, breakfast, lunches and dinners. Like, my mum was there to do grocery shopping and to, like, take us to appointments, but she's not the most maternal and great with the kids, so, like, spending time with the kids wasn't her forte, and cooking was not hers. So it was still, like, things that I had to do and get done. And for some reason, you know, I didn't see one friend out there. Like, it was just, that was already come and gone, you know. So it was quite isolating, and I was so unwell. And I think I found you at this point. I can't remember whether I found you before he had his scan with Charlie or after he had his scan with Charlie. I'm not sure.
I remember you telling me about the results.
Yeah,
I think just before maybe.
Yeah, because I think I found you for me. Like, I reached out to you because I wasn't feeling great, and I was having all of my stuff. So you were supporting me with, like, herbs and acupuncture and testing, and my mum was bringing me in for that. But it was also that moment of, like, Diego's not well enough to have the kids, and I need help to help him. So it was just this really messy time in our lives of him declining, and it's almost like a big blur, because my nervous system I just never realized that the nervous system could attack your body and not your mind. Like, I didn't feel it coming, you know, like,
you were just running on adrenaline.
yeah. And I just didn't realise it.
Having babies, breastfeeding.
Exactly. And, you know, like by this point, you know, I'd been breastfeeding for like 9 years straight. Like it's just, but you don't think, like it's not like I didn't feel or look exhausted. Yeah. But you're right, like adrenaline obviously does some magic, right? Yeah. Like I was just
depleted.
Yeah. And then until, I didn't see the signs coming. Yeah. You know, I wasn't like mum that was like couldn't get out of bed. Like I was just like, my body was like go, 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 go until I was like dizzy and holding my head and trying to get him seen. And it's traumatic. Like my health was such a traumatic, and I guess it just all come at the same time. And you know, obviously doctors were like, when I would go to a doctor, they were like, well, of course you feel this way, your husband is dying, here's some Valium. I was like, no, this is bigger than that. Like I'm, you know, like the symptoms that I'm having, it's not anxiety. Like this is just, anyways, you were probably the main person that supported me, I think, through all of that. And then obviously came, every time I would come and see you, it was like, how's Diego? And each time I was like, something more and more. And it was like, we were exploring maybe doing more testing with him and things, remember? And then we were like, I think we came to the point where you were like, having those honest conversations, like, should money be spent here? Like, we both kind of like same thing. You kind of look at each other and you just kind of know, like, you need to look after you now. And I never did that. Like, I never did that financially. Like, I gave every cent that we had to fighting his life, that there was nothing left there for me. And, like, who's going to raise the kids? Like, there's no one. There's not even like, if I die or something happens to me, they're orphans. Like, that's our life. Like, it sounds so drastic, but it is like that. There's no backup. There's no aunties and uncles or anyone that's going to come and sweep us up off their feet. Like, they are orphans, and now we have no money. And I just remember you were the first person that brought that up. Like, should we really be spending $1,000 on this? Like, you know, I think I even spent like $1,000 in supplements just before he.
I was trying to get you with Katrina, remember?
Yeah, like it's just like, okay, let's stop now. Like it's like it's too far. It's going downhill. And then, you know, I think I noticed when he became unstable and with NDIS, the wheelchair came, and that was the big stepping, like the big milestone of, okay, here we go. Like, he can't walk now, you know, but he was still able to go to the toilet on his own. And you know, so like all these, like I was trying to get NDIS, and because we were rural, like we had NDIS at this point, but to physically get the things you need and the support workers, they weren't even in the home. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was really hard to get supports and things that I realised that I really needed. And so we did get a wheelchair, but we got a wheelchair from the neighbour, so still not even NDIS. So we've been approved for all this money, but where's the wheelchair?
Yeah, okay.
They were meant to give us like incontinence aids and things like that. There was nothing. Even right up until his passing, we never got incontinence aids. Like, I had to go out and get them. So, like, ramps. He had a wheelchair, but we didn't have ramps. So there was like 3 months where he was in a wheelchair and there was no ramps. He couldn't get in and out of the house. Like, but it kind of hit me, I think, when I was there by myself with the kids and he'd gone to the toilet, because, you know, he was still quite modest, and he would, like, I would wheel him or he would wheel himself. Like, there's dings all through the house of, like, him trying to get he could get from the wheelchair to the toilet, or from the wheelchair into the shower. But see, our shower was like a little cottage, so it was like this little bathtub with like a shower in it, so like it wasn't ideal. So we were like, there was times where we were like, NDIS would rip out that bathroom and redo it and make it disabled, like, proof. We don't have time. Like, everything takes time and quoting, and so like then you get all these different things that you can put on the shower to get him in, but like it's just me, and then you're trying to protect his dignity as well in all of this, you know. So it's really, really hard to watch him when you know that this is not what he wanted. So you're watching him deteriorate. So there was a time where he went to the toilet and then he just couldn't get off. And it was just a moment of like, what now? Luna's not going to help me. She's like 8 years old. You know, like, how do I get him off this toilet? You know? But my mum, I don't know if she'd been out and she'd come home, or I can't remember exactly, but I was just like saving grace. Like, but my mum's old, but then she'd also done nursing, so it was kind of helpful in some ways. Two of us get him onto the wheelchair, but then all of a sudden you don't realise how heavy someone is to just do that and then get him into the wheelchair, into the bed. And then we had to get him into the bed, so then we're like, okay, we need a hospital bed in the bedroom. All of this is just, you know, coming at us really fast and trying to navigate it really fast. Like, things were changing almost at this point by the day. Like, he was declining by the day, he was stuttering, and then they were like, you know, he needs to eat soft foods, you need to feed him, hand feed him, you know, all of these things, calling the kids different names. And I think the biggest thing in all of this is towards the end, which has made a big thing in our life, which is what I was telling you earlier, is like he became very verbally aggressive towards the end. So like he got in the wheelchair, but he just became really mean and really nasty to the kids, more than I realised it would ever impact them. You know, like we'd be sitting at a dining table and, you know, Luna might ask him something and he'd be like, fuck off, get fucked. Like that's how he would speak to the kids. And Luna would have been like 7, 8 at the time. And then younger, you know, and I just remember her sitting there like crying, like bawling, like, Dad, why are you talking to me like this? And even though like we would tell her, this is the tumour, this is not your dad, he loves you, in that moment she's a child. And I just remember her screaming like, Dad, don't talk to me like that, I love you, why don't you love me, like you don't love me anymore. And I just thought like, how is this happening, you know, like, and little did I know the impacts that it would have today. Like what are we, like over a year later, and she's still dealing with the guilt of, you know, because like obviously then she would lash out and she'd be like, I hate you, Dad, I don't understand. But she didn't realize like her dad was dying. So all I wanted to do was like not scare them, but I wanted to wrap my arms around them and be like, he's dying, like we have to be kind and he doesn't mean it. But you know, he would fight back. He'd be like, oh fuck off, go fuck off. Like, you know, she'd be like, Dad, I love you, oh fuck off. Oh my God. It's just like, I don't, like, we just couldn't understand it. And I just remember too, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I put this in the second one that we recorded, but I just, and it sounds awful coming out of my mouth, but I remember my mum being there, and, like, we're not even being that close, but he's just started to get really nasty to me, and we were, at this point, getting someone in as, like, a death doula to help me, support me, and I remember her coming out and witnessing some of his nasty behaviour, and even the concerns of they can actually become quite violent. Not only this, at this point it was like mentally, like verbally aggressive, but they can actually become quite violent. And like there was that part of me of like, I need to protect the kids and myself, but there was a moment where he was getting quite nasty, and I remember being in the kitchen and it was getting really bad, and I just remember saying to Mum, like, he walked off, and I just remember looking at Mum like bawling on the floor, just going like, can he just go, like can a heart attack take him, like I can't do this anymore, like I've got nothing left, like I'm still unwell, but I'm standing up and I'm trying to take my own supplements and trying to survive my own health issues, and the kids are falling apart, and he's, you know, it's just like I feel awful, like I feel so awful saying that I just, you know, but I just like, can a heart attack take him, like this is too much, and you know, this could drag out for months. Brain cancer does that, like it takes them well before it takes them, like it could be weeks, it could be days, or it could be a year that he's going to be like this. And I remember having this conversation with Luna like only a couple of weeks ago, when she broke down about the guilt that she has that he's dead, and she just wants to tell him that she's sorry, and it shattered me. And I just remember sitting there in the car with her, just like being honest, and I was like, you know, I understand your guilt, he loves you, it wasn't him, he knows, you know, because like how can she say sorry to someone that's passed, like that's all she wants, so she just wants to say sorry. She's like, I just want one of his hugs, and I'm like, that's all I want, is just one of his hugs too. But I just remember saying to her, you know, that I wish that he had passed from a heart attack. Like I told her that. So I'm looking at my 9-year-old that's crying, like just going, I wished he was dead too. Like I have guilty moments of wishing that he was dead before he was dead, but like it was hard, you know, and it wasn't just her. Like it was okay to be angry at him. It was okay to say the things you said to him because he was being nasty, you know, but he knows, like it wasn't him, and you know, the real him didn't see that or witness that, if that makes sense. Like it's like we witnessed it live, but just trying to explain to her and trying to like tell her that, you know, she's not the only one. You know, it was really hard, and it was really horrific, and you know, he loved us, and yeah, I think we're just trying to heal together. Does that make sense? Like it's brain cancer is so cruel. I think it's just some of the things that people don't talk about, you know.
Okay guys, we've broken the podcast episode into a couple of episodes as they're very long, so stay tuned for the second episode, and you know, please reach out to Hayley if you feel called to. Send her a message, see how she's doing. I'm sure it will just make her day. Thanks for listening guys, and enjoy the second part.